the experience I had in 2016. I spent 1 year as a postdoctoral fellow at Morgan State University with HBCU in Baltimore. And I was there to conduct a research to analyze the way that Peruvian immigrants construct their racial identities in a transnational dimension. And my project was to compare Peruvians in the United States with Peruvians in Brazil. And the main idea was to understand race in the Americas. What are the differences, not only in the big scene, but also to the individuals that are migrating, how they deal with the fact that also their racial classifications change according to the place where they are. And what brought me to this research was my PhD research. Since 2011, I have been working with Peruvian immigrants in Brazil. And one thing that really disturbed them when they get to Brazil is the fact that several of them who consider themselves white or mestizo, and mestizo is almost an euphemism to white, they are called Indio in Brazil. And lots of them, they have really hard time trying to cope with this word that has a very negative meaning in Peru. So that was my research, and yeah, I think I should go on, and then I go back the reason why this 2016 was so important. So the objectives of this talk tonight is to analyze the challenges of research racial identities and racial issues. I would say not only identities, but racial classifications in a transnational perspective. And now I'm focusing in the Americas, considering Brazil, Peru, and the US by the experience of Peruvian immigrants, and also examine in which extent the researchers' racial identities and racial presentation affects the research, considering that I am a black Brazilian doing research with Peruvian immigrants. One really major issue is the fact that I'm a black researcher, and usually researchers are not black, and Peruvians are not expecting to interact with a black researcher, and how does that impact the research itself, and reflect on the ethical and political implications of racism and field work. And I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to talk about that at the end. So the methodology I've been working with is mostly ethnographical field work, but in the US, I tried to work with ethnographical field work, but I couldn't, not really. I was not really able to do that, and one of the reasons why, so yeah, estoy adelantando. One of the reasons why I couldn't, yeah, I said I could not help the Spanglish, right? And one of the reasons why I couldn't do the ethnographical field work I wanted to do, and I have been doing in Brazil for many years, is the fact that I'm black, and Peruvians see me and they think I'm African American. And in the area I was working, which is the area of Maryland, DC, and Virginia, there is a major tension between Latinos and African Americans. So they saw me as an African American, and that was not positive at all. So I was constantly rejected by Peruvians in their spaces of sociability. So I realized that would never really work. So I decided to work with in-depth interviews. So the theoretical framework I am working tonight, and I think it has been helping me to think about race, and also my experience as a black female from Brazil doing research and traveling around different countries in the Americas. The main theoretical framework I'm using right now is the conception of Africanidade. I don't know if any of you are familiar to any Black Brazilian sociologists. This is a concept built by Lélia Gonzalez. She was a black female sociologist from Brazil, and she writes this concept explaining that the conception of Latin America take into consideration whiteness, and the main source of constructing the idea of Latin America is whiteness, and the participation of black and indigenous people in the conception of Latin America is under, how do you say that? Como no es valorada. It's not yes, enough. So the concept of Americanidade is aims to consider the contribution and the participation of black and indigenous people to build the concept of the continent, and not only the particular nation societies, but also the continent itself. And also, Pamela, I forgot to ask you how much time I should. This is something important.
Take your time. It's between 30 and 40 minutes.
Yeah, can you tell me when it's like too much? Yeah, I guess I can talk more than I should. So.
You can talk.
Okay. Yeah, and I try not to, take all the space of talking, but sometimes I can help. So if you could tell me, that would be awesome. And I get really excited to talk about my research. So. And the other really important theoretical framework I've been working with is the idea that Rita Segato has constructed. Rita Segato is an Argentinian anthropologist who lives in Brazil. And she works with the idea that race as a sign. And it means that even though every country has a conception of race, each national society constructs their own interpretation of race and who are the racialized other that are in opposition of the neutral idea of citizen, which is basically white. So the idea of race as a sign explains that each national context and historical context construct their conception of race. So if we want to understand race transnationally, we cannot assume that there is a single interpretation or meaning what is race and also what is black and what is indigenous. So, and that is really important for me. I'm not focused on this, and I would take the 30 minutes to discuss the differences and the singularities of racial formation in each country, Peru, Brazil, and the US. But I selected the three countries not only because I was already working with Peruvians, but traditionally racial studies compare US from one side and Latin America on the other side. This is a really traditional way of building our racial studies, and also racial movements, black movements all over Latin America. We have in the US a reference, but what I wanted to understand was also the particularities in Latin America itself. And even these two major differences between US and Latin America, US was constructed in the idea that each racial group also build an ethnic group, and then they keep some boundaries between them, and the interaction when it happens, it still keep the boundaries between them, while Latin America was based in the idea of mestizaje, of miscegenation, and the idea that the national identity is based on the mestizo identity and the pride of being mixed. Even though these are the two main forms of reading racial relations in the Americas, through my experience with Peruvian immigrants in Brazil, I realized that is not enough to understand the meaning of race and also the way which race and racism reproduce in particular national realities. So I'm thinking if I should speak it right now or later on. I'm gonna talk it later on. So, I think one major thing to take into consideration before we move on is the fact that both Brazil and US, we have as reference of the citizen and the other, the racialized other, the black people. And in Peru, this major racialized other, that is the opposition of the citizen, which has a reference of white, is are the indigenous populations. So this has some impacts in the way that Peruvians find their way into racial classifications in Brazil and Peru. And also myself as black, I'm also classified in different ways in Peru and Brazil and in the US. And it tells a lot about the racial formation of each country. So the first challenge I had to work with race is the fact that Peruvians talk a lot about race, but they talk about race when I don't ask them. If I ask them, can you please explain me racism in Peru? They don't talk. Most of them, they don't talk. But if I'm not asking them, if I'm hanging out with them in a party, most of times they are going to mention race. So they are going, for example, I used to dance in the Peruvian folkloric group in Rio, and I remember a friend in the group, he always explained he was really shy. He was like mestizo, really light skin, and in Peru he's white. But he said he was really shy when he was not dancing because he had indigenous blood. And it's the indigenous blood that makes him shy. So I am black, and I usually, when I'm in a good mood, I am smiling. So Peruvians explained, oh, you smile because you are black, just like black people in Peru, because black people are happy. Like, yeah, not all the time. I am happy, I guess, most of my time, but not all the time. So this is an example how race comes out, like comes into conversation. But usually if I ask them about race, they don't talk about race. So that was the first challenge I found. And I remember one day I was presenting my research, and an anthropologist, friend of mine, told me, well, if you are asking them and they are not talking, maybe this topic is not important for them. And I think it's a really problematic way of seeing things, because Latin America don't talk about race. Lots of us still believe that class is more important than race, and race is not, it's lots of time ignored, but still, most positions of power in Peru and in Brazil, they are still occupied by mestizo and white people. So, and several people who are here in DC area, there is a group of black Afro-Peruvians activists. They see racism in their experience, and they have experienced racism since they were very, very small. So, and the fact that in lots of countries in Latin America, like Peru, there isn't a I was about to say there isn't a vocabulary to talk about race, but maybe this is not the right way of saying that, but the vocabulary that exists to talk about race is not part of people's everyday life. It doesn't mean that racism and race doesn't matter. So, and that was a major issue for me, because I myself was being discriminated against by Peruvian immigrants. So I could not just accept that, oh, if they are not talking about race, then race is not important, because not only me, even Afro-Peruvians themselves, they were being discriminated against by Peruvians. So that was the first challenge I had to do. So I tried some interviews with Peruvians that I met, and they were nice to me. They didn't reject me. So I started asking him, like, oh, how do you identify racially? And they're like, what? what do you mean? I don't understand what you mean. Yeah, what is your race? Like, race? What do you mean? No, we are all mestizo. We don't have such a thing. Race is something that exists in the US. It doesn't exist in Peru. We are all the same. Because my abuelito, my grandpa was Chinese, and my abuelita is Spaniard, and my other abuelito is Afro-Peruvian, yeah. And I dance Afro-Peruvian music, and we are all the same. We don't have this problem. This is our U.S. problem. So, yeah, so I realized after a couple of interviews, like 3 interviews, that, yeah, I was not definitely asking the right questions. And then I started thinking, what would be the right questions? Specifically, and I think this was a major issue for me here in the U.S. because I didn't have the chance to hang out with people on a daily basis. So in Brazil, even though it's hard for them to talk about race as well, I had the chance to hang out with people much more often. So I had the chance to check when they were talking about race, and sometimes they were using racial classifications, even not naming race. So sometimes they were like, when the guy said, I'm black, I'm happy, just like Afro-Peruvians, he's using a concept of race. So there is an expectation that all black people are going to be happy all the time. So just like I am black, Afro-Peruvians, they are like that as well. So, and also I had the challenge to work with that in a transnational perspective. So what I decided to talk about racial relations in the U.S. and Brazil, I would use questions that already exist. So in the U.S. case, it's way easier because most of the forms we fill up ask about race and ethnicity. So I decided to ask them the same questions I had to answer when I fill up my Social Security form, which is number 6, are you Hispanic or Latino? And the question number 7, what's your race? So, and these are the options: Native Hawaiian, how you pronounce that? Yes. Alaska Native, Asian, American Indian, Black, African American, other Pacific Islander, and white. And I interviewed around 12 people, and just one person answered the 2 questions with no problem at all. So all of the 12 people, they said they were Hispanic or Latino with no problem at all, no doubt of that. They were sure about that. But the number 7 was tricky for everybody except one guy. And the guy that had no doubt about the answer, he was white. He's a white Peruvian from Lima, and his family is from Italy. And he's really proud he's an Italian Peruvian. And he spent some of the time of the interview telling me that his abuelita cooks pasta and tomato sauce, and I think they even had his cousin had a restaurant in Lima, so he was really proud of being Italian Peruvian. That was the only person that had no problem to answer, and I myself I have problem answering because I am sure I'm Black African American, but I'm always unsure if I'm not American, so I'm not sure if these categories would include myself as a foreigner. So in case of public policies, I don't know if they would also consider myself. But I don't live in the U.S., so it's not a real issue for me. But there are lots of black, no-American people who live here. So and they are unsure as well. At least the Afro-Peruvians. In the case of Brazil is really different from the U.S. So usually we don't have forms that ask about race. And the fact that we have forms in the U.S. that ask about race, it makes people think. Even if they don't pick any options, people have to think. In case of Brazil, there aren't forms that ask about race, except, oh, I would say most of forms don't ask about race, except our national census. And this is the question exactly how it shows in our Brazilian national census form. And the question is, what is your color or race? And I had put the translation down there, but so the categories are white, black, yellow, and yellow means Asian, parda, and parda means multiracial, mixed race, and five, indigenous. And if you say you are indigenous, you have other questions that you have to say from which ethnic group you are from. And usually now, I guess most of you know that in Brazil we have some affirmative actions. And if a person who is indigenous apply for affirmative action, um, service or policy, they need to prove that they are from an ethnic group, and the proof is a letter from the cacique, from the person who has the power in the group, saying that that person belongs to the community. So, in Peru, they had no questions about race until in any forms, and until 2017, there was no question about race in their census. So, in 2017 was the first time. Oh, they had in the very past, but in the very past, the question was not self identification. But in 2017 was the first time that the person itself identified, and the question was through your costumbres. Can you help to translate? Customs and ancestors. Would you feel or consider yourself Quechua, Aymara, native or indigenous from the Amazon, belonging to another ethnic, indigenous or originary people, and pay attention in the black categories. They include several names, and some of them there are no translation. So, negro, sambo, mulato, moreno, pueblo, afroperuano, or afrodescendiente, and white, mestizo, other. So this is really new. This question came up to the census, or was brought to the census in 2017. So when I was conducting the interview, um, that was the conversation, but there wasn't the structure of the question yet. But it still, I think, could be difficult to use just this question to talk about race. So, what are the challenges I faced to conduct this interview? The first of all, the conception of race itself tends to emphasize some elements in some countries and is not the same in other countries. So Brazil, the conception of race is really related to the phenotype. What is your presentation? And your presentation means that you are gonna be more exposed to racism than others. So if you're dark skinned, you will be much more exposed to racism than light skinned black or still and white people. So phenotype is really important, and this is actually an issue we have because we have been having lots of issues with our affirmative actions and how we um, decide who is black or not in Brazil, since miscegenation was the basis of national identity. So ancestry in Brazil is really problematic because pretty much all Brazilians has a black ancestors in their family tree, and this is not a lie. It's not a lie. It's the truth. But still, there are people who are white presenting who had a great grandparent who was black. That person is not going to be exposed to racism as someone who is like who has a phenotype, like who has dark skin and African phenotype. And Peru, They tend to emphasize ethnicity and ancestry, the two elements. So Afro-Peruvian dance and music play a really important role in the construct of Afro-Peruvianness. Oh, I'm talking about blackness and not the others because it's the. I'm just realizing I'm just talking about black, and that is the focus of my research. But I guess I didn't realize it before. There is, and there is one issue that is really important in Peru is the place that the people are from. So, and this is really important for people who identify as indigenous or are identified as indigenous or cholo, but still, even when they do not consider themselves cholo or indigenous. If someone is born in the Andes, in the mountains of Peru, and combine the phenotype, indigenous phenotype, this person is going to be exposed to discrimination, and the place of origin is it's really an important point in the racial construct of indigenous people in Peru, especially those who are from the mountains, from the Andes. Another challenge is the fact that mestizo is really an umbrella term that includes lots of people, but usually mestizo is used as a form to not talk about race and not talk about racism and deny or hide the fact that light-skinned mestizo, white mestizo, they have privilege. So mestizo is a hegemonic identity that silences race and racism, usually. So it's not only about acknowledging all the different groups that brought the person to where he or she is right now, but also kind of whitening the past and the present. So as I told you, in the beginning, Peruvians talk about race and racism if you don't ask about it. So usually they don't like talk. So even if they are talking about it and you ask more, lots of them stop talking. And for several Peruvians, to talk about race itself is racist. So they prefer not talking about the topic. And anti-blackness in the fieldwork, which I'm going to talk later on. So I had the census question from Brazil and the Social Security form questions for US, but I had no way to ask people about Peru itself. So I tried to ask like abstract questions like, is there racism in Peru? And how people identify themselves racially in Peru, and it didn't work at all. So I decided to work, well, after reading a lot and thinking, what am I gonna do? Peruvians don't wanna hang out with me. The questions I'm asking them is not working at all, so I need to find another way. So I started reading and thinking, and I came up with this, I was about to say solution, but I don't think it's a solution. It was like a way to try to have information. So I decided to pick these pictures. They are famous people from Peru. And they are famous people that I consider, so I am considering myself and the Peruvian friends I had the chance to ask. We picked these people that we would consider would represent the diversity of Peru. Obviously, it doesn't include everybody. So in Peru and their history and its history had a really important Chinese and Japanese immigration. So among these people, there is no one who is Chinese or Japanese, which is a problem. But also I could not put lots of pictures, otherwise my interview would last forever. And we are in the US and we are not in Peru or in Brazil. I could spend 2 hours talking to people, but in the US, people work 2-3 jobs and they don't have 2 hours to be talking with me. So, and this is also a reality. So time is really an issue that I realized really had an important role in my research. So these are the artists. So you can see the first one is Paulo Guerrero. He's a futbolista. He's a soccer player. And the other beside Paolo is Magali Solier. She is an actress and singer from Ayacucho, which is the central Andes of Peru. The other beside Magali is Rafael Santa Cruz. Rafael Santa Cruz was an Afro-Peruvian musician and artist. Not only musician, he was a multidisciplinary artist, and he played a really important role in um, rescatar. Oh my God, my Spanglish. But rescue makes sense in this case.
Recover.
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah, recover the history of the Peruvian cajon, and he was the founder of the International Cajon Festival. So he's really, and he's nephew of Victoria Santa Cruz, which is a really important Afro-Peruvian artist. Um, Beside Paulo Guerrero is Susana Baca, who is an artist, a singer. And in the center is Aristoteles Picho, and he's an actor. Beside him is Giancarlo, who is a singer. In the bottom here is Gabriela Alcântara, an actress. And beside her is Chabuca Granda, who is a musician. She was a musician. So I showed these pictures, each one of the pictures to Peruvians. And first I asked them to describe the pictures. So some Peruvians describe it everything but the race. So they describe it the color of the earring of Chabuca Granda. It's like, oh, I didn't even realize that Chabuca Granda was wearing earrings. Yeah, she is wearing green earrings. Oh, okay. So I was sure this person didn't want to talk about race. And there is also important data. So when people doesn't want to talk about it, it means something. And one thing that was really interesting, so I asked people to describe. Then I asked people to select the people to put another order of people who they think would suffer more racism in Peru. And most of people said that Aristoteles Picho, the one in the center, would be the one that would suffer more racism in Peru. And the reason why is because he has an indigenous phenotype. He's from the Andes. And do you know why they can tell he's from the Andes? You can see the back. So they say, oh, he's in the mountains, so he's from the Andes. And he has an indigenous phenotype. And he is wearing a hat and a chompa. The hat and the chompa are really important outfit for people who live in the mountains and people who are exposed to cold weather and belongs to some group. So also his outfit locate him in a specific place, and this place is racialized. And some of people, so the very up of discrimination is Aristoteles Picho, and the second one was Susana Baca. And the reason why is because she's dark skinned. The others, I thought it really interesting because Aristoteles Picho picture, this picture is from a movie, and the movie takes place in Ayacucho, which is the place where Magali Solier is from. Magali Solier is from Ayacucho. But Magali in the picture, she is not wearing anything that is ethnico. So she's not so she has no landscape behind her. She's not wearing trenzas or pollera, nothing that locates her in the Andes and in the indigenous identity. So she kind of occupied the in-between. And after that, I asked people to say if any of these people look like them. So we had 4 major classifications. First of all, were the white people. Nobody in Brazil. I need to say one thing that here I conduct a mailing interview so I could organize the data. In Brazil, I conducted 6 interviews, but most of my data in Brazil come from ethnographic fieldwork, so they are not so systematic. So from the people I interviewed in Brazil, none of them consider them white. And the U.S., there were 4 people that considered them white. The first one that I told you, the Italian Peruvian, was the only one who said that he is white wherever he is. So he's white in Peru and he's white in the U.S. as well. And 2 guys, and also the sister of Diogo, I interviewed him, his sister as well. They consider themselves white in Peru, but they realize that they are not white in the U.S. And Diogo says he's not white in the U.S. is because he's white, but he's not gringo white. A gringo white means that the gringo white is even light skinned, and he's not included among the gringo white. So I interviewed him at Johns Hopkins. He was a student at Johns Hopkins, and he said white friends. He had several white friends. He didn't like hanging out with Latino students, and he said that he was okay hanging out with white, but his white friends will always make fun of his accent, and that was an issue for him. So he saw that even though he considered him white, the other white guys didn't see him as white. And Sebastian, I forgot an S in his name. These names are not real names. Sebastian, he sees that he's white and he's whiter than other Latinos. And for him, that was an issue because Latinos usually told him that he was too white to hang out with them. And white people said he was too Latino to hang out with them. So he could not fit either way. And Sebastian said he looked like Paulo Guerrero. So you kind of can have an idea how Sebastian looked like. So mestizos. So mestizos are those who consider themselves multiracial. And these mixed race, the mix are really diverse. So there was one person that considered himself Indian, or I would say indigenous and white. Another person who considers herself African, Chinese, indigenous, and white, and another person black and white. And like these, the mestizos, these people who consider themselves mestizos, they are those who can fit well among Latinos. And one of the complaints that they have is that sometimes American people call them Mexican, as if there was no difference between Mexico and Peru. And some of them are really connected to the community, not only the Peruvian community, but also the transnational Latino community. In Brazil, they also consider themselves multiracial, and the mix that came up was mainly white and black and white and indigenous. And 2 of them consider themselves pardo in Brazil. So they try to translate mestizo into the Brazilian category, and they believe that pardo would be the category. And one thing that is really interesting is the fact that most of Peruvians, they had no idea what pardo meant. And that means that this is not a category that people speak in their everyday life in Brazil, but it still is the official category to name mixed race people. So Lourdes, the lady who said he was a mix of Chinese, black, Spaniard, she said she looked like Magali Solier. And Eric said he was a mix of indigenous and black. And he said if he had to pick pictures, he would be a mix between Aristoteles' picture and Paulo Guerrero. Oh, I repeated. Oh, no, I'm coming back. Okay. So among the people who classify themselves as indigenous there are different categories. Some people call themselves indigenous, others call themselves Inca, and others call themselves Cholo. So nobody calls themselves Indio. Indio is a really negative word, so never would Indio to name a Peruvian. It's really offensive for Peruvians to be named Indio. And several of them are named Indio in Brazil. And Brazilians are not aware about the history of the term, so they use as if it was not a problem. And usually Brazilians don't take into consideration that the Peruvian is really molesta, is really unhappy with the term, and still use it. So, um, and these people, they consider themselves indigenous Inca Cholo because they themselves, or one or two of their parents, they are from the Andes. And usually, there was one girl that I'm going to show her picture, that she grew up in, I forgot the name in Spanish, but in a area outside Lima, and her family is from the Andes, but she herself was born in Lima, but she grew up with people who also had this indigenous background from the Andes, so she considered herself Chola. And phenotype plays a really important role in their classification, and they recognize that they are not they are discriminated against both in the Peruvian community and also from the U.S. or American and Brazilian society. So one of the guys who described himself as indigenous, he said in the Social Security form he would pick the category Native American because he said, well, Native American is related to indigenous, so I'm indigenous in Peru, so I would be Native American. And he said he looked like, Antonio said he looked like Aristoteles Picho, and Karen, who is in Brazil and consider herself Chola, she says she's a mix between Magali Solier and Aristoteles Picho. And in the end, here are the Afro-Peruanos, Afro-Peruvians. So in the area of DC, the DMV area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, there is a group of Afro-Peruvian activists. So they talk about race, so I decided not to use the same questions and pictures with them. I didn't thought it necessary. So they talk about race, and this is part of their political work and political engagement. And they have a really problematic positionality because several of them, they don't feel comfortable with Peruvians because Peruvians usually are not aware of race and racism, specifically anti-black racism. If Peruvians recognize that there is racism in Peru, usually they mention racism against indigenous people and completely ignore racism, the anti-black racism in Peru, just because it shows up in different ways. Usually anti-indigenous racism comes up in a way that is much more violent and overt. And the anti-black racism in Peru comes in the form of microaggression and stereotypes, like the one that Peruvians are always asking me to dance and to be happy all the time, and they think I cook very well, and that so these, for them, is not racism because it's just so friendly. They're just being friendly. So, and several Afro-Peruvians, they don't want to deal with that. Another issue that they also don't feel comfortable with African Americans because, well, there are several reasons, and one of them is the fact that Afro-Peruvians are really mixed, and several of them are really light-skinned, and some of them, they don't have curly hair, they have pelo suelto, they have straight hair, so they feel that they are not accepted. Even in Brazil, there is one Afro-Peruvian I interviewed. He works at OAS, so he travels a lot, and he has been going to Brazil many times. And in Brazil, lots of people don't consider him black, even though he is black. And the position he has in OAS is related to African descent people, people of African descent. So they struggle to fit also into Peruvian community and also black community from other countries that consider black, part of the blackness being dark skin and having more African phenotype. Yeah, I think this is the black. Oh, and one thing also important is the way that they name themselves. They usually say Afro-Peruvian and not Negro or so usually Afro-Peruvians they call themselves Afro-Peruanos because they try to honor their African ancestry even though they don't have really strong or really clear African phenotype. So they prefer Afro-Peruano and not black or negro. And in Brazil, there is just one Peruano, Peruvian who considers himself Afro-Peruano. And he's a cajon player. He is in the center, and he plays in the grupo Negro Mendes. But he is aware of his blackness, but he doesn't engage to black movement, not even in Peru, neither in Brazil. So, Pamela, I'm talking a lot.
How about 5 more minutes?
Great, yes. So I'm really excited, but I don't want to make you guys tired. So this is one quote from Jaime, this Afro-Peruvian who is light-skinned and travels to Brazil and work at OAS. I was wearing a suit, ready to start my talk in the consulate for the Black History Month. So one thing important is that this group of Afro-Peruvians, they request the Peruvian consulate to celebrate the Black History Month, honoring the Black Peruvians, the Afro-Peruvians. A Peruvian guy came to me and asked if I was the musician who would play the cajon that night. So Jaime was really offended because this is not the first time that people think he's a cajon player or a soccer player or whatever but a lawyer. That is what he is. So, and for him, this is one of the reasons why he doesn't want to be in the Peruvian community, because events like that repeats over and over again, and he doesn't want to be exposed to this kind of racism that people don't even recognize as racism. So just to finish, and one major issue and challenge was the anti-black racism and fieldwork. So as I told you before, it was really hard for me to conduct the research I was trying and the methodology I wanted to use, because Peruvians really avoided my presence, and the way of avoiding was sometimes one of the strategies I thought about using to approach Peruvians is I learned how to dance some Peruvian folkloric dances, and there is one dance which is my favorite that is not really popular. So just people who really know Peru dance this dance. So I believe that people would be really happy and embracing me because I dance tondero. No. So I called several groups, and the only group that I could arrive by bus, I can't drive, so I had to go somewhere that I could arrive taking trains. I would take train, bus, and everything. Was in the lady's house. So the ladies told me that, oh, I'm gonna call you and give you my address. She never did. And I called her like 4 or 5 times. She never gave my her address. That is one way. And the other way of rejecting, of avoiding my presence that was really strong was the look. The way people look at me when I was in the event was just horrible, and they really made sure they were not happy with my presence. So yeah, I understood. And the reason why, because they think I'm African American and they don't have a good relationship with African Americans, and also anti-blackness. So it's not only about the tension that exists in the place, but also the anti-blackness that they bring at home. And they see African Americans as black people who are like hard to deal with, while Afro-Peruvians are the nice black people and they are more sweet. And one of the reasons why they see me as African American and not Afro-Peruvian is the fact that I have natural hair, and natural hair is read as something really political. So it means like, oh, she's probably an African American. She's going to give us a hard time, and we don't want that. We don't want her here. And Brazil, I was really accepted in the Peruvian community. I didn't have any problem hanging out with Peruvians. I was really welcome in the event. And the way I got into the fieldwork and the fieldwork opened up to me was really racialized, but in a different way. I consider my official entrance to the community was when the Peruvian folkloric dance group invited me to perform the poem Me Gritaron Negra, the by Victoria Santa Cruz. If you don't know the poem, I really recommend. It's really powerful, and I realized the poem. I am not a performer. I am not an artist, but I felt really honored to perform the poem, and I felt the poem, even though Victoria Santa Cruz is Peruvian, it was my story as well. So I felt it was really important, and I was glad that the group wanted to show these experience of blackness. They also showed other experience of blackness that was related to stereotypes, specifically mainly in dance and music. And yeah, and for me, I had to negotiate the stereotypes, and which I consider is one form and one expression of racism. But this racism is different because I had the chance to talk to people and say, no, I don't like that. I am not going to wear this minimal skirt and show all my body dance, whatever dance. No, thank you. And they listened to me and they respected my position. Sometimes they did anyway, but I tell them, sometimes I told them, I am not doing that. So, and they said, okay, we are doing, okay, but I am not. So the expression of racism was different. In the US, I didn't have the chance to talk to anyone. So, and this is me performing Tondero in Baltimore in the City Hall in the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. And the other picture is me performing Me Gritaron Negra in 2012 in Rio de Janeiro. And in the back is the Negro Mendes, which is the group of Afro-Peruvian Afro-Peruvian music. So, and to finish, I promise. So what I realized in my fieldwork was, it took me a while to realize I was suffering racism in fieldwork. And when I realized I experienced a really, really deep and difficult event of racism. And then I realized that I myself could be in danger, not only in a metaphorical or theoretical way, but my life itself could be in danger. And I got really depressed after that, and I realized I could not expose myself to that kind of work anymore. And I started looking for a way my first idea was to live, to have a life and a healthy life. So so I think it's really important that I had to find solutions for my research, but also for my own life. And I think it's really important, specifically for people of color who are doing research. We cannot ignore that we live in a world that has several layers of oppressions, and we have to negotiate with that layers and sometimes reject them. And what I decided that I will not try to hang out with Peruvians anymore. I will not expose myself to racism anymore in that terms. I would work with interviews with people that I already met or people that other friends recommended me. And one really major space that I found to heal myself was a collective called Neighborhood Voices. I became part of the collective, and now my research right now is about the collective. And the collective organized workshops to talk about race using arts, mainly storytelling and visual arts. So we had the chance to learn concepts about race, and then we saw the concepts in the stories of people. So, and there I learned that, first of all, I was studying Peruvians, and I was thinking about the way Peruvians talk about race, but I realized talking about race and racism was really difficult for myself. And I myself learned how to talk about it, not only in the theoretical way, but also in my everyday life, and also build the strategy to recognize when I was being discriminated against, because lots of time I was being discriminated against and I felt bad, but I was like, oh, no, Camila, it was just a look. That's okay. Let's move on. Let's move on. And that is how we learn to deal about race in Brazil, and that is really damaging, and that was really compromising my mental health. So I decided to stop. And in the collective, I learned how to name these looks of discrimination, how to name a joke, how to name, and that is really powerful. So the first picture is we had an annual performance. We had now the collective is not active anymore, so that was the 2017 performance, and the picture, the small picture was a collective and collaborative exhibition that was made from the workshops, and that's it. I'm sorry I talk too much. Timing is a real problem for me in the US.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you. It was really wonderful to listen to you. And yeah, we open the floor to questions and comments.
Questions?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Peru. In order to understand the history of Peru, you have to do a whole complete research. It's like not only to do a research, but to know the history of Peru. That the Peru was the center of the Spaniard dominance. From then, they controlled from more 4 centuries the whole continent. So the oldest institutions are in Peru. The oldest university, the Tribunal of San Inquisition, and other institutions. Just going briefly, I was reading like in order to understand the Peruvian culture, you need to understand the language first, the Quechua language. Because the Quechua language, you don't understand the Quechua language, you made the research in Spanish. So you are like partially you go into that world. When the first Spaniards came in order to catechize, the native Peruvians, the first Bible they were written in 3 languages. One of the introduction was Spanish, then in Quechua and Aymara, the most spoken language. The Quechua was around all the Incas Empire, and the Aymara was around the region of Puno, Cusco, on the area. And for example, just I want to hear at the NYU was like the Quechua language. Somebody give like a speech. It was interesting because I don't know Quechua, only a few words. But they mentioned, for example, that in the Quechua language doesn't exist you and I, but we. It means it's a culture of sharing. So from that point of view, I realized so many years I'm, reading, I didn't know. I find out something interesting, open my world. I mean, it's another culture. This is the Western civilization. This is Peruvian culture. And just skipping a little bit more, when the Spaniards start establishing, they try to designate the culture, to impose their culture. So those are the first ones to establish the government. The people in the government, they control. So they despise the native Peruvian culture, even though the native Peruvian culture was an advanced culture. So in that prospect, posteriorly, all the culture came after the native Peruvian, like the African, Peruvian, and so on, they were despised. But the native Peruvian with the African Peruvian, they go together, and it's expressed in the music. They mix, the Andean music with the Creole music. Yeah, and the proof of that is the Lord of Miracles. The Lord of Miracles was painted by from and the slave from Africa in Pachacama. The replica is in the capital, and you know, all the people venerating procession right now is the fraternity goes around the world, even though in the Vatican and, you know, in France also. So it's like, when I heard you, like you're telling partially something like it's like more complex that require more investigation, further investigation. And, but discrimination, yes, from that times, I'm talking about the 16th centuries, yeah, there is discrimination, bro. The Spanish started this, they discriminate in the culture, and they continue till now. So the people who control and minister, you know, all the time, there's a group of people, you know, who administer one country, they preserve that type of, you know, bias against the, you know, native Peruvian. Not only native Peruvian, African Peruvians. So it's something like it didn't start like a few years ago. This is from the colonial times. And it's expressed because like the people who have light skin, regardless of the skin, they try to, if you were born in Peru and you see that just discriminated and you have just a last name that is not native Peruvian, you try to get away from that group. And they discriminate the other people who have, you know, native Peruvian names. That's the way this in Peru. The people like the white skin, even though they are, you know, they are no European and everything, and maybe have a Spanish last name for third or fourth generation, they separate, they consider another group themselves. And they discriminate with other people. That's what it is in Peru. But this is something ancestral. It's like, I don't see that much hasn't changed. Maybe lately the move the people from the agriculture area to the capital is changing progressively the landscape of the ethnic distribution in the capital. There are more people from the Andes area in the capital than before. Definitely, maybe 30% more.
Since the 40s.
Yes, so it's changing, reshaping not only in costume, in music, and everything else. And the president that you observed before, until maybe Toledo, all the presidents were only, you know, Spaniards or white, with except Velasco Alvarado was like maybe 2 or 3 presidents were military, native Peruvian. In that respect, regardless of all that, I really appreciate your investigation, but shed light about
Thank you.
the Peruvian culture.
And thank you for coming. It's always an honor to present for Peruvians, and for me, having the feedback from Peruvians is really important. And I'm still part of the Peruvian community in Rio. I'm not part of the Peruvian community here because I was not accepted, but I'm still part of the Peruvian community in Rio, and I'm always glad to have the chance to share my research. So it's really important for me. And during all my research since 2011, I have been working with Peruvian immigration, and with different focus. Peruvians has been the people that really interacted to me, and we really have an open relationship to discuss my research. So this is, I'm telling that because it's still in Brazil, lots of people don't understand why I'm working with this topic. And this is really related to the fact that in many spheres, Brazilians don't really know about Peru, and not only Peru, but the neighboring countries. And it's hard for me to find in academia peers that work with Peru and are able to discuss with me. So Peruvians are the experts that has been talking, and with whom I have been sharing my research, is the different dimensions of my research. So this is the dimension I brought today. In February, I was in Peru to study the tondero, which was an amazing experience. I came back with a herniated disc after dancing so much. But still, I'm working on my Pilates, and I'm really happy. And during all these years, it's been 98 years, Peruvians has been really generous to me, accepted here. And I think it's also related to what it means to be a Peruvian in the U.S. So today I focus on the Peruvian dimension, but I think the Peruvian experience also talks a lot about the societies where they are staying. So most of them, they have 2, 3 jobs. They also have to deal with the white supremacy in the U.S. So at the same time, they discriminate against in a way. They kind of feel more powerful when they have the chance. Well, some of them, it doesn't mean all Peruvians are like that. So yeah, there is so many layers that we could go through, but I think at the same time that usually Peruvians don't like talking about race, I'm really glad to see that there have been changes in Peru, and the fact that we had, sometimes I forget I'm not Peruvian, not we, but Peru had included the question about ethnicity in the census is something really powerful. After the 2017 census, this is the first time that there is data about where black people are in Peru. So right now, there are people that are planning public policies for black people in Peru. And this is really revolutionary, and this is really important for black people all over the continent. So this is really important for us to know as well. So that there are so many things happening in Peru that we have also a lot to learn from Peru.
I want to ask you, your research is about discrimination of black people by Peruvians. I grew up in Peru. I haven't been there in a very long time. However, when I grew up, where I grew up in Arequipa, which is mountains south of Lima, we rarely saw any African Peruvians because they were regionalized to the north of Peru and certain areas, and there was no contact. Unless people in Lima, of course, had a lot more contact because you have Trujillo and so on. But a lot of the other Peruvians that come from lower areas, from the south and more to the Andes, have little contact at that time. I don't know how it is now. At that time, there was such little contact. And now, as a Peruvian who has come to the United States and lived for so long, I have so many African American friends, and I have so much to relate with them. So you have had a perception that some Peruvians in this country do not admit to the fact that there is racism against blacks by Peruvians. But maybe there isn't. Or maybe there is just lack of familiarity. So I'm just bringing those ideas.
I don't know.
Let's take a few
Okay.
questions and then you answer all of them.
Let me write down because,
That's all you like?
yeah, y con todas las lenguas sí me olvido. Al final no hablo nada con tanta lengua. Encontré.
Go ahead.
So, hi Camila. First, thanks for your presentation. That was really, really great. So, just some few quick questions. You mentioned in the 2017 census in Peru, there was this question about ethnicity. So, could you share some results? I'm especially curious about what's the percentage of Afro-Peruvians, Afro-Peruanos in Peru? And second, in your experience, were most of the Afro-Peruanos light-skinned or dark-skinned? And finally, I would like to hear your thoughts on racial democracy as we have in Brazil, and similar thoughts in some parts of Latin America. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I took this part of my presentation. I would be speaking for 5 days in a row.
one more question?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the previous comment and also thank you a lot for the presentation, which was amazing. I'm also very much concerned with race in my own research. I'm also Peruvian. And
Oh, wow, ¿cuántos peruanos? Oh, qué lindo.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Vamos a celebrar la canción criolla.
Unfortunately, I'm doing Halloween more now.
Oh.
Traitor to my tradition. But I think one of the reasons people tend to think that they don't see Afro-Peruvians that much, or we are not being really in contact with that, is because the historical presence of Afro-Peruvians, which has been really, really central in Peru, especially in places like Lima, which at some point during the colony, I think it was almost 50% Afro-Peruvian because of the slavery. But that tradition has been incredibly silenced. So it's not like Afro-Peruvians haven't been there. They have been there a lot during history, but they haven't been recognized other than as a folkloric sort of other that is not part of really the history of the country. It's not part of the national narrative, which is, as you said, built as a mixture between indigenousness and whiteness. So I think those are precisely the narratives or the ideas that we need to start challenging by looking at history, but also by looking at how anti-blackness still persists and is really very much present of how nationality is built in Peru. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, and so I was just a little bit curious. You already mentioned some ideas, but I was curious on what are the reasons that you see behind the difference between how Peruvians relate to blackness in Brazil and in the US. So you mentioned it has something to do with the US context and in US segregation, etc. But I was curious if you could say a little bit more about that. And also, you also mentioned at the beginning of your research that you did some research in Peru as well. So I was wondering what kind of findings did you find when you saw racism in Peru, if you saw it at all. I don't know. Thank you.
Okay. So let's start by the easy one, the numbers. Numbers are easy. I don't deal with them very well, but they are easier. So the result from the census was that there are 3.7% of Afro-Peruvians, and they are located mainly in Tumbes, in the very north up to, I don't know if it matters for you, the places where they are.
Yeah, but they are north, and part of the reason I was told, basically I never lived in the north of Peru. You know, I went to Lima a couple of times, so I'm not that familiar, but I know the situation. The majority of Afro-Peruvians live in the north.
Yeah. I was answering his question, so that I would locate. And I was asking him if it matters to you where they are.
Not really.
No, okay. I was about to say the name of each province, like yeah. I guess you don't need so much detail.
But I was told that the reason that they kept African Peruvians living in that area is because they could not adjust to the temperatures, to the cold temperatures in the south and in the Andes. And that is the reason they became regionalized to that area.
Yeah, I think the main issue, my research is not about history itself, but I think there is one really main issue that sometimes we Latin American, it's difficult for us to deal with, is the fact that anti-blackness is not the same. And lots of people expect that anti-blackness is necessarily what happens in the US and the way that black people is treated in the US. So lots of people expected that the only way that anti-blackness manifest is through segregation, is through police brutality. So, for example, in Peru, I, from what I listen from my Afro-Peruvian friends, I'm not going to say this is not my data, but what I listen from my friends, Afro-Peruvian friends, police brutality is not an issue for them in Peru, but they still have other issues. So this number of Afro-Peruvians, probably they are not all the Afro-Peruvians, because lots of people who are black in Peru, they don't name themselves as Afro-Peruvians because Peru is also based on white supremacy, like all other countries in the Americas. So it's what you're gonna gain, what you're gonna get, name yourself Afro-Peruvian in a place that people expect Afro-Peruvian to play soccer, cook, dance, and play the cajon. These are the possibilities for a person. And what are the possibilities for a mestizo or a white person? Can be a doctor, a lawyer, a congressman. You have so many more options. So why would you decide to be Afro-Peruvian? So, and this is something that I think we have a lot to work on. Anti-black, and U.S. has such an important role in our political education, but also sometimes it's keep us in, it doesn't help us to understand our particularity. That's why I'm studying race as a sign. We need to see it to history, and 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 that is true that you're saying that in the Andes there aren't many black people. This is true, but I wouldn't say, I don't know, I couldn't say that there is no anti-blackness because black people are there, they are majority, they are mostly in the north. I just think anti-blackness in Peru is different, and we need more time and more work on trying to understand what is being black in Peru. Maybe not even the start should be to think anti-blackness, but just spend time with black people in Peru. Where are they living? Where are they studying? Where are they working? What are they doing of their life? So if we go to most of the communities, the Afro-Peruvian communities, and Tondero is from one Afro-Peruvian place. Several people in Morropon, they recognize themselves as black. You go to Morropon, how many people in Peru know Morropon? How many people outside Peru know Morropon? How many people outside Peru know Lima? Who is not from Peru here? Have you heard about Lima? Have you heard about Cusco and Machu Picchu? Have you guys heard about Morropon? Oh, there is something going on. And Morropon has this beautiful dance which I love and I recommend, which is Tondero, but you guys don't know Morropon. So maybe people don't know Morropon, people don't know the places in Lambayeque. Maybe it's a little bit more than because black people, they are a small number. And I think this is really important for us to talk about because even in Brazil, that black people, we are so many in Brazil, and sometimes we are not able to understand what is it like to be black in a place that you are the minority. You are not only the political minority, but also the minority in numbers. In Brazil, we are 54% of the population, and we still are the political minority. And we still suffer a lot. The poor are mostly black. The university people, they are mostly white in Brazil. And we are 54% of people in the country. Can you imagine what it's like to be black in a country that you are 3.7%? And that is a lot. In Argentina, black people is even a smaller number. And still, if we think about human rights, black people have the same rights or should have the same rights as everybody else. So if these people, they're not having the rights, it doesn't matter how big or how small the community is. There is a problem, and we should think about it. And as a researcher, there are some answers that for me is like, it seems like no. And I cannot use myself as like the center of the world or the center. So I cannot say, oh, there is racism in Peru because I was discriminated against. This is not enough. But I am meeting lots of Afro-Peruvians who are also saying, they are now giving names. That's why black movement is so important all over the world and also in Peru. They are naming. They are naming. They say, oh, you see this really funny blackface guy who is in TV right now? Blackface is not funny. This is racist. And they are fighting. They are, going to lawsuits. So I think we have lots of work to do. Let me see quantos afro-peruanos son. So in my experience, most of Afro-Peruvians I've been interacting with, they are light-skinned, and several of them, they have straight hair, which is sometimes curious because we are all black, but we are black but also so different. And and some of them are really like, oh, your hair and stuff, and just our blackness is really different. But it's still, one thing that is really interesting, like in Jaime, that he is really light-skinned. He has curly hair, but he's really, really light-skinned, and he told me the first experience of racism he had in his life, he was 4, and he was in kindergarten, and one white boy told him, I don't want to play with you because you are black. And he started crying, and the teacher said, no, don't worry, that's okay, you play with something else. And that was the first time that he heard he was black, and that was a bad thing. So even though he's light-skinned, and in Brazil, and he get in Brazil, and he go to black movement in Brazil, lots of people tell him he's not black enough. He had an experience of racism, much more, I was about to say violent, but I would say overt, that I never had anyone telling me I'm not going playing with you because you're black. And I much more dark-skinned than he is. So I think it's a challenge for all of us of all colors to understand the context. We cannot assume that we know. We cannot assume that we cannot ignore what people are living, what they are suffering. We cannot just assume. Otherwise, we are going to be silencing them. That's why silence was the title of my talk. Because there are lots of people who are being silent, and I don't wanna no. I was silent too, and I don't wanna be the one silencing people as well. It's really hurt. It's really painful. Really. So that was a point that I was really depressed. I was in Baltimore. I didn't want to get out from my apartment. So if I didn't find a space that I could speak, maybe I'd not be here. So I don't want to play this role, and yeah. The difference, I think I talked so much and I didn't let it clear, the difference between the anti-blackness in Peru and Brazil. So I think Peruvians in Brazil, they see a connection between Afro-Peruvians and Black Brazilians and Afro-Brazilians. And the connection is, I think one thing is really important I didn't mention. In Brazil, I work in Rio, which is a place where there is a big black population. So for several Peruvians, it's Rio, the first time they're going to interact in real life with black people. And they relate Afro-Peruvians to Afro-Brazilians. And the way they relate the two black population is through these folkloric stereotypes that you mentioned. So, and I think one thing that is really, really interesting is the connection that they make between festejo, which is our Afro-Peruvian music and dance that is really energetic, and it's like you move all your body and hips, and they connect the festejo with samba. I was, oh yeah, you guys, we dance festejo just like you guys dance samba. And the two kind of music, there are several kinds of Afro-Peruvian music, and there are several kinds of Afro-Brazilian music. But why festejo and samba are the two rhythms that people know more? Why do you guys think that? It's not a rhetoric question. Why you guys think that samba and festejo are the two references of blackness for?
And more sexualized?
Yeah, this is the dance that people move a lot their hips, and usually people who dance when men are dancing festejo, they don't wear shirts. They just he just wear pants, and women they wear really small skirt and a top showing our body. So it's hypersexualized black bodies, and even someone who's not black who's dancing is still reproducing a hypersexualized image of black people. So, and this is what also happens to samba. So, so this is all the Brazilian. I don't know if it's is it clear the connection. On the other hand, Peruvians they don't see Peruvians here. They don't see a connection between Afro-Peruvians and African Americans because the experience and the way of presenting blackness is different here in Peru. So the Afro-Peruvians would be, how could I say that? Would be like the nice black people. Oh, they are black people, but they are happy. They dance festejo. They hang out with us. The African Americans are the angry black people. They are the ones who are messing around. They are complaining everything all the time. They are the one that is, you know, yeah, they are too politicized and angry. So the black people in Peru, like I think Peruvians don't see a connection between Afro-Peruvians and African Americans. So yeah, that is basically.
I just wanted to thank you, of course, thank everyone. And I thought it was very smart, very interesting that in your methodology that you found this way to talk through the pictures of the artists, because I thought that was wonderful because it's such an important way in which we relate to each other nowadays. Like many people sort of take these public figures as standards. And it also made me think of Facebook posts. Like I feel like I have found out about racism in Peru through Facebook posts, like that discussions that happen through public like advertising and public figures in Peru, and that now they are sort of discussed on the social networks. And I guess I wanted to ask if I really think you found a wonderful way to do your field work in a very different way. I guess I wanted to ask if you found other researchers doing something similar, or how did you find this way to do the field work? Because if you have found yes, like other academics or other writers who are doing a similar way to sort of give this turn in the way you approach people and do the field.
Another question, maybe?
Hi. Again, thank you for the talk. I'm from Latin America, I'm from Nicaragua, so it's been an interesting process also to think about race coming to the US and suddenly realizing that I'm brown. So, but I think my question has been, because I've been exposed a bit more to the West African, but also the African diaspora spiritual traditions within the US and within part of the Caribbean cultures that are actively practicing it. But for example, in Nicaragua at least, it's not such a common thing. Or at least I don't actively know about it as much as someone from the Pacific Coast and from Managua. It's not something that we converse, again, same as what you were saying. The most known Afro-Nicaraguan tradition that we have is hypersexualized dance, and that is association with it too, right? So I guess that my question was like, in this research, how did that African spirituality actually came to play a role in the way that people understand and relate to your different informants and your different collaborators on that space that, yeah, that can become a way of opening up to communities, right? Where you're able to create that connection through a practice that also in the U.S. have been labeled as different practices that has been labeled to a degree as anti-Christian, something that you shouldn't be practicing, etc. So, yeah, if it came to play at all.
There is one other question in the back.
Thank you. So you mentioned it a bit about class and about the importance of class in Latin America, and people say that it's more important than race. I was wondering how race and class intersect in Peru, and also because of your methodology, you presented your interviewees with pictures of famous people, like successful people. So is the perception of their class affecting the perception of their race?
So I didn't answer one of your questions. That was if I conducted fieldwork in Peru. So since 2011, when I started my fieldwork in Rio. I usually travel to Peru at least once a year, up to now. But I never got funding to do like systematic research. So every time I had the chance to afford, I went to Peru and had to leave for my work. I went to Peru and I kind of kept some notes in the ethnographic kind of field work notes, but I never conducted like systematic field work, except from my last trip to Peru in February. I was there for a month doing research on the Peruvian dance. I dance, and that's how I got the herniated disc. But it was a more practical research. So, and I think one thing I want to share before answering the other question is that I'm talking about Peru, and also Peru is really important for my own Black identity. So I come from Brazil, this country that has 54% of Black population, but we are also based on white supremacy and miscegenation, white supremacy through miscegenation. So one of the strategies that my family, and mainly my mom, built to make me successful was to not keep any Black reference around. So I grew up not having any Black reference at all, not even my extended family. So I grew up with my nuclear family. I went to church. I went to private school, and that is how I got here, really young. I'm here, speaking 3 languages, sometimes at the same time. But now more than ever, I realize the high price I paid to be here. So, and I have been working on my own Black identity. So it's an ongoing process that is not done. So, and I think this conversation about racism is really important because lots of people believe that once you have the blood, you are Black. But it's not only about that, it's a political process. So it's been like 4 years that I have my hair natural, and I'm really glad about it, but it took me really a lot of years to be able to do that. So I think this is really important conversation that we need to include in our research, that we cannot ignore. And Peru has a really important role in the process of building my Black identity. And usually Peruvians in Rio, they ask me why I like Peru so much, and I decided, like, I built up a small story about it. And the story is, the first time I went to Peru was 2007, and I went to Lima. That was nice. But then I went to Cusco, which I loved. And there I met lots of indigenous women, and they loved my hair. And that was the first time in my whole life that someone told me that my hair was beautiful. And my hair had always been a struggle in my life. I always hated my hair. And in Peru was the first time I heard that my hair was beautiful from indigenous women. So this is the story I tell, and I think it's really important, and I think, yeah, I think we have a lot to think about, and also the different possibilities that a black person used to build identity. And Peru really is part of my life. Really, not only it's not only about research. It's about the space and the people that I started building a positive and intentional black identity. So I think it's important to let you guys know. And so the methodology, I remember I read one dissertation from an African American who studied race in Brazil, and she was doing something that I wanted to do, which was the racial perceptions of Brazilians in the US and when they went back to Brazil. So that was, but she didn't mention anything about the pictures, but she was doing the work I was trying to do. And she was African American. There was one part of her work that she talked about her own positionality in US and with Brazilians in the US and Brazilians in Minas Gerais, where the Brazilians were from. So I took that for her, but the idea of images and pictures came from my collective. And I think this is also important. We think about learning from university, but we have a lot to learn from social movements. They are the ones that are like doing the hard work of trying to change things faster than we are able to do. And my collective, the collective I was part of, worked a lot with visual art, and there were several people in the collective that were visual artists. And when I started going to the collective, they were planning the collaborative exhibition. There was cards, like gift cards, but the cards had our racial identity according to the census, the one that we thought was ours. And inside of the card, we should draw things and record a small story about us, like 1 minute of story. So I started thinking about the visual aid in the collective. And spirituality. Wow, this is tough. And I didn't answer about, yeah, all the hard questions I'm not answering. The democracy, the racial democracy, Jesus Christ. I don't want to talk about Gilberto Freire. So the spirituality is, I'm glad I told my story before because it's also related about the spirituality. So the African, we have big Afro-Brazilian religions in Brazil, but that was never my experience. I grew up evangelical Christian, and pretty much everything that was related to black was bad and sinful. So I could not dance. And when I was small, my mom was part of a really traditional evangelical Christian church, so I could not dance. I could not listen to music that was not evangelical Christian, and the religion was really demonized. So I have no connection with the Afro-Brazilian religion, and I've been working on that to learn about that, and the religion has been really powerful to black people survive, really, really. And this is also not metaphorically, really, to believe that there is an ancestor, and also the sense of belonging or having a family tree. We don't know where our ancestors are from. So believing that Oshun is my mom keep us a sense of belonging and a sense of family tree, which I don't have. I don't know who is my mom, and my father Orisha, because I'm still learning how to connect with the religion, and also I want to do that in a respectful way. But at the same time, I am not a religious person anymore, so I'm also learning how to learn and respect, learn about myself, learn about the religion and respect, but also I don't want to be involved as practicante. So, and in Peru, People say that the African religions didn't survive in Peru, but I don't know. One day I was talking to a friend of mine who is Peruvian, and she's studying anthropology, and she mentioned that in oh my God, what is the area where the Balumbrosos is from?
Chincha.
Yes, in Chincha. She is white mestizo from Arequipa, but she has relatives in Chincha, which is a place that is really recognized in Peru by having a big Afro-Peruvian community. And she said that her families, they have stories about going to the cemetery at nighttime and taking skeleton, but it's something that nobody talks about. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there is, but it's still part of the silence. So one of the dimensions of silencing. And what I can tell is that, as you mentioned, Señor de los Milagros, the Lord of the Miracles, which is a saint that is related to Jesus, but was painted by an enslaved from Africa. Was it a woman?
Angola.
Was it a woman?
No.
No, I'm.
Slave from Angola.
Oh, from Angola. Okay, I heard it was a woman. Like, oh, everybody had told me it was a man.
The fraternity. They
Yes.
have a fraternity after
Yes,
fraternity,
yes. So,
and they venerate with religion and their own African, rituals by parallel. So he painted.
oh, that's amazing. And the Hermandad, there is one. I was about to say we have the Hermandad again. There is one Hermandad Señor de los Milagros in Brazil, and last year they completed 25 years. But what I think interesting, I was never in the celebration in Peru, so it's really huge. But in Rio, even though the history of the Hermandad, the brotherhood, is related to blackness and the history of African American, Afro-Peruvians, in Rio, people don't mention it. Like, people are really devoto. They pray for Señor de los Milagros, but I don't see people mentioning I'm sure they know. People know, but it's kind of okay. We know, but we move on because it belongs to everybody now. So we don't need to say this was African. It just belongs to everybody.
And at the end, they made the Lord dance Creole music.
Oh, really?
Yes. You never see. I thought you knew. Yeah, they
Oh
made
my
dance
God.
Creole music.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yes, it's African American music, but the time has to be present there. They making dance.
Where is that?
It's all
Here
all
or
places.
in
Here
Peru?
in Peru, here all over.
Wow.
The image of
In
a
Rio-
miracle, they make dance before they end the mass for keeping in the church. They make the
So
dance with
Peruvians-
the music.
Peruvians.
Marinera, tondero, Creole music, guitar with cajon.
So Peruvians in Rio, they are really conservative. Señor de los Milagros doesn't dance there. Maybe they are conservative. And the question about race and class, definitely class affects race. So class is a possibility to be closer to whiteness, but it still doesn't erase race. And I think Magali Solier is really a great example. Magali Solier was 16 years old when she was found out by a movie maker, and she started being hired to make movies. And she's very, very famous, but she has been suffering so much demonstration of racism. And she talks about it, and she's part of campaigns, anti-racism campaign in Peru. And she tells that sometimes she go to fancy restaurants in Lima, and a waitress doesn't serve her, and she receives several hate messages on the internet. People scream at her and say she's ugly, and why is she so famous if she's so ugly? She should be in the poor communities in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. So people say really mean things to her. So race kind of help, but doesn't erase race at all. So I I think did I forget something? And I don't think so this time.
Any other commentary?
Can I? Yeah. So it's already super complicated, but I want to add something. Like I don't know. So it's kind of a recent stuff with all the Venezuelan refugees like moving to Peru. Like I think now there are more than 1 million, and among them there are many black Venezuelans. So I don't know if you had the chance to look at that, like how is discrimination against them, because it's like a super multi-layered thing, right? Because they are like immigrants, but also yeah, so it's super complex.
Yeah.
But it's something I'm thinking about to research. So yeah.
So you're gonna tell me? I really wanna know.
Sure.
So this last time I was in Peru was for Febrero.
It's February.
Was February. So I saw lots of the people from Venezuela all over all the cities I were. So I went to the north where Tondero is from, and from the north up to Lima, there are Venezuelans really everywhere. But I didn't. The Venezuelans I had the chance to interact, or maybe one guy was black, but I'm not sure if he, identify himself as black. And no, I really gonna have to wait for your research to learn more about it. And I'll be glad.
A long time probably, but yeah.
I'll be really glad to learn, and I think it's really powerful.
It's something changing, because in the beginning, Peruvians were really welcoming with Venezuelans, regardless of their skin color. But like I don't know, in the last, I would say like few months, maybe a year, it is really changing. So I mean, this is my perception. Okay, like I don't know. I'm also checking Facebook posts, and they are getting more and more.
Yeah, I've seen several messages of not welcoming people from Venezuela, and several Peruvians. What I've heard and seen, but it's not scientific data. It's just like from hanging out, going to salsa. I love salsa dancing, and I met some Venezuelans dancing salsa, and I made some friends dancing salsa from Venezuela. So what I saw happen is that lots of Peruvian people complain because there are some employers who prefer Venezuelans than Peruvians. So, and this is the traditional speech that Venezuelans are coming here to steal our jobs.
Yeah, it's
so
like the same kind of stuff.
yeah, but in Peru, I think there is still an extra layer, because several what people are saying is that some employers prefer Venezuelans because they are not indigenous looking, and they say that Venezuelans are more educated, and I'm not sure if they are hiring Venezuelans really because they are more educated or because they look like less indigenous.
And they pay them less, to be honest, as well. So it's
Yeah.
there are
So
several layers.
really, I am going to have to wait for your research.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I'm really excited to know about it. And you should dance salsa. The salsa is a great place to conduct a field work. I'm serious.
I have a last comment and question. It goes back to your methodology, and you're being a black researcher, and you said that you can identify looks of discrimination. You could identify looks of discrimination when you were doing field work. Could you expand on that and then close around that?
Okay. I think that was the most difficult thing for me to name and recognize that the looks of discrimination was affecting me. And I can't really remember how it came up to my mind, but one day I decided that every time I felt weird, because I could not name what I was feeling. People look at me and I felt bad, and I could not name what that feeling was. So I decided that I would write. Every time I felt bad about something, I would write. And I am kind of workaholic, so I tend to ignore what I'm feeling, and I think, no, Camila, I think just you're being floja. You're just being lazy. You have to try harder and harder and harder. But then going to the collective and writing down every time someone looked at me and they felt uncomfortable, I realized it was not flojera. I was not lazy. I was being discriminated and I was feeling bad about that's why I was feeling bad. So that feeling that I called weird, I didn't have a name for that, was the feeling of being discriminated against. So, and also I realized that I had problems, I acknowledged, had hard feelings, in, not only in field work, in my life. So it's really been a processing of therapy, real therapy, after I came back to Brazil to realize how to connect to my emotions and use emotions as part of the process of doing research and identifying these silent discrimination that might be other people who are also being discriminated against, but at least in Brazil we learn to ignore and say, no, you know, Camila, you're so strong, so move on, yeah, keep on working, you're so successful, so keep on working, and you are great, and yeah, I am great, but it's still, I feel bad, and that's okay to feel bad. So I consider this, so this research, for example, is still really hard for me to, now I can talk about it, but I still can't write about it. I can't be alone with this topic and with the interviews because I feel sad again, I feel angry again, and these are feelings that I don't want to feel in my apartment by my own. I want to feel good in my apartment. So there might be other people who face that, and I think, yeah, we need to acknowledge these feelings as a part of our life and also part of field work.
And you being a black woman?
I think being a black woman is part of the fact that it's hard for me to acknowledge my own feelings, and not being able to acknowledge my feelings is part of anti-blackness because people are telling me I have to work and just be strong. So I learned this is how this is the way to be. And I realized when I was in danger in field work that not connecting with my emotions and just moving on really was putting my life in danger. Not only my mental health, mental health is important, but there was one point that even my physical, like my integrity, my physical integrity was at stake, and it's really a hard price to pay. So black feminism has been really powerful for me to understand what is the impact of anti-racism on my own life and how my inability of connecting with my own emotions is part of anti-blackness. And that's why I think this is important to talk about. And it's a lot of work that is still it's ongoing work.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.